In the early hours of September 2nd, 1666, a fire began in the City of London. It started in a bakery on Pudding Lane. It spread through streets built closely together. Over the course of 4 days, it altered the shape of the city. This is the account of that fire, how it started, how it spread, how it was finally stopped. We will follow the events as they unfolded, day by day, hour by hour in some cases. The story is drawn from contemporary records, from diaries kept by those who witnessed it, from official reports written in the weeks that followed. This is not a dramatization. It is a reconstruction of what happened based on what is known. The Great Fire of London destroyed most of the medieval city. It left tens of thousands homeless. It consumed buildings that had stood for centuries. But it also led to change, to new building practices, to a different kind of city. We begin not with the fire itself, but with the city as it was. Before the flames. In the 17th century, London was the largest city in England. It was a centre of trade, of government, of culture. The population was estimated at around 400,000 people. This made it one of the largest cities in Europe. Most people lived within the old medieval city walls, or just beyond them in growing suburbs. The walls themselves dated back to Roman times. They had been rebuilt and repaired over centuries. By 1666, they no longer served a defensive purpose, but they still marked the boundaries of the old city. The city was densely built, space was limited, land was valuable, streets were narrow. Some were only wide enough for a single cart. Others allowed 2 people to walk side by side. Buildings were closely packed. They shared walls. They leaned against each other for support. Many houses were made of timber, oak frames, wattle and daub walls, sometimes with plaster or brick facing. Upper floors often extended over the street. This was called jettying. It created more living space on higher floors. But it also meant that buildings on opposite sides of a street came very close together, sometimes only a few feet apart at roof level. Roofs were covered with various materials. Thatch was common in older buildings. Wooden shingles were used. Tile and slate were also present, though less common. All of these materials could burn, some more easily than others. Fire was a constant presence in daily life. Every home had a hearth for cooking, for heating. Open flames were necessary. Candles provided light after dark. Oil lamps were used. Lanterns were carried in the streets. Workshops used fire for their trades. Blacksmiths, bakers, brewers, candle makers. There was no centralized fire service, no professional firefighters. When a fire broke out, the response depended on neighbours, on local organisation, on whoever was nearby. The tools available were simple: buckets of water, long hooks to pull down burning thatch, hand-powered pumps that could spray water a short distance. Water came from the River Thames, from wells scattered through the city, from conduits that brought water from springs outside the walls. These sources were not always reliable, not always close to where a fire started. London had experienced fires before, many times. Most were small: a house fire, a workshop fire. They were contained before spreading far. Some fires were more serious. In 1212, a fire on London Bridge killed many people. In 1633, a fire near London Bridge destroyed hundreds of houses. The city knew fire was a danger. Regulations existed to reduce the risk. Building codes specified materials, required certain distances between structures, mandated the presence of fire buckets and ladders. Night watchmen were supposed to patrol the streets, to raise the alarm if they saw flames or smelled smoke. But enforcement was inconsistent. The city grew rapidly. Economic pressure favoured quick construction, cheap construction. Old buildings remained in use long past their safe lifespan. New buildings were built too close together. By the summer of 1666, conditions were particularly dangerous. Little rain had fallen for weeks, perhaps months. Records mention a long dry period. Wooden structures dried out. Thatch became brittle. Any spark could ignite material that would normally be damp. The wind that summer blew frequently from the east, strong and steady. In early September, this wind was still blowing. It would play a critical role in what happened next. Shortly after midnight on Sunday, September 2nd, 1666, a fire broke out in a bakery on Pudding Lane. Pudding Lane was a narrow street near London Bridge. It ran down toward the Thames. The bakery was owned by a man named Thomas Fariner. He was a baker to the king. He supplied bread to the royal household. The fire is believed to have started in or near the oven. The exact cause was never determined. It may have been embers that were not properly extinguished. It may have been sparks from the oven itself. Such incidents were not unusual. Bakeries operated at night. Ovens stayed hot for hours. The fire spread quickly through the wooden building, up through the floors, across to the roof. Thomas Fariner woke to find his house burning. He managed to escape through an upstairs window. He climbed across to a neighbouring building. His family followed, his daughter, his apprentices. One servant did not escape. A maid who was too frightened to climb across. She died in the fire. She was likely the first victim, though records do not name her. By the time neighbours were alerted, the fire had spread beyond the bakery. The buildings on Pudding Lane were typical of London. Timber-framed, close together, many with thatched roofs. The fire moved from building to building. Heat ignited walls. Sparks landed on roofs. Local residents tried to fight it. They brought buckets. They threw water. These efforts were not enough. The fire was already too strong. The wind drove the flames forward. Within an hour, several buildings were burning. Someone sent word to the Lord Mayor, Sir Thomas Bloodworth. He was the chief civic authority in the city. Bloodworth lived in his official residence. He was woken in the night, told about the fire on Pudding Lane. He made his way to the site. This took time. The streets were dark. The route was not direct. When he arrived, he assessed the situation. Bloodworth had authority to order buildings demolished. This was a standard method of fighting fires. By pulling down structures in the path of the flames, a gap could be created. A fire break. If the gap was wide enough, the fire could not cross it. But demolition came with problems. It required labour, equipment, time. It also required legal authority. Property owners had to be compensated. Mistakes could be costly. Bloodworth looked at the fire. It had spread to perhaps half a dozen buildings, maybe a few more. He is reported to have said that a woman could put it out, that it was not serious. This may be exaggeration in the records, but it reflects his decision. He did not order major demolitions. He left the firefighting to local efforts. He returned home. This decision would later be criticised. The fire continued to spread. As dawn approached on Sunday, September 2nd, the fire grew stronger. It moved down Pudding Lane toward the Thames. The river was only a short distance away. Near the Thames were warehouses, storage buildings, docks where goods were loaded and unloaded. These warehouses held materials brought by ship: oil, tar, pitch, timber, coal, alcohol. Many of these materials were highly flammable. When the fire reached the warehouses, it intensified dramatically. Oil and tar burned with great heat. They created thick smoke. The flames spread rapidly along the riverfront. By Sunday morning, a large section of the waterfront was on fire. People living nearby began to flee. They carried what possessions they could. Some loaded belongings onto carts. Others hired porters to carry goods. Many went to the Thames. Boats could be hired to transport people and possessions across the river, to the south bank, which was safer. The river itself became crowded. Small boats moved back and forth. Some carried people, some carried furniture, clothing, valuables. The fare for a boat crossing rose quickly. Boatmen charged what they could. On land, the fire continued to advance. It moved westward along the Thames. It also moved north into the city proper. The wind pushed it forward. The narrow streets channeled it. The timber buildings fed it. Attempts to fight the fire continued, but they were disorganized. Different parishes had different resources. Some had hand-powered fire engines. These were wheeled pumps that could draw water from the river or from wells. But the engines required several men to operate, and they had to be positioned close to the flames. The heat made this dangerous, sometimes impossible. Water supplies were limited. Some conduits had been damaged by the advancing fire. Wells could run dry from overuse. Flying embers became a serious problem. The wind carried burning fragments high into the air. They landed on roofs hundreds of feet away. A building might seem safe, then suddenly its roof would catch fire. This made fire breaks less effective. Even if a gap was created, embers could cross it. By Sunday afternoon, the fire had spread westward along Thames Street. It had reached Lombard Street to the north. These were commercial areas. Streets lined with shops, merchants' houses, warehouses. All were burning now. Church bells rang throughout the city. They were meant to warn people, to call for help, but the sound added to the confusion. It was difficult to know which direction was safe. Some people tried to save their belongings by moving them to churches. Stone churches were thought to be safer than wooden houses. They carried goods into church buildings, piled them in aisles and chapels. This would later prove to be a mistake. By Sunday evening, the fire had not slowed. If anything, it had grown stronger. Entire streets were walls of flame. The heat could be felt from a distance. Smoke filled the sky. It could be seen for miles around London. The night brought no relief. The fire burned on. Monday, September 3rd, dawned with the fire still raging. The wind had not lessened. It continued to blow from the east. During the night, the fire had spread further. It had moved north into the heart of the old city. Cheapside, one of the main commercial streets, was burning. The Royal Exchange, a centre of trade, was threatened. More people fled. The roads leading out of the city were crowded. Families carried children. Elderly people were helped along. Carts piled with possessions moved slowly through the streets. Some people went north to the fields beyond the city walls. Moorfields and Finsbury Fields became camps for the displaced. Others crossed the Thames to Southwark or travelled west toward Westminster. The scale of the displacement was enormous. Tens of thousands of people on the move. There was fear, confusion, rumours spread. Some said the fire had been started deliberately, that it was the work of enemies. England was at war with the Dutch. There was also tension with France. Foreigners in the city became targets of suspicion. Some were attacked by mobs. These suspicions were not based on evidence. But fear made people look for someone to blame. The fire itself continued its advance. By Monday morning, it had reached Cornhill, Gracechurch Street, areas that had seemed distant from the original fire. The Guildhall, the centre of city government, was in danger. Officials began removing records. Documents were carried to safety. The building's stone construction offered some protection, but not enough. St. Paul's Cathedral became a focal point of attention. The cathedral stood on high ground in the centre of the city. It was surrounded by open space, churchyard, streets that were wider than most. Its walls were stone. Its reputation was as a place of safety. Many people had brought their possessions to St. Paul's. Booksellers from Paternoster Row, near the cathedral, stored their stock inside, huge quantities of paper and books. The building was also undergoing repairs. Scaffolding covered parts of the exterior. Timber scaffolding. By Monday afternoon, the fire was approaching the cathedral. Buildings nearby began to burn. The heat grew intense. Embers landed on the cathedral's roof. The roof was covered with lead sheets over a wooden frame. The lead began to melt. It ran down the sides of the building like water. Witnesses described it flowing in the gutters. Once the lead was gone, the wooden roof structure caught fire. The fire spread through the interior. The books stored inside burned. The scaffolding burned. By Monday evening, St. Paul's Cathedral was destroyed. The roof had collapsed. The interior was gutted. Only the stone walls remained standing, and even these were damaged by the heat. The loss of St. Paul's was deeply significant. It was not just a building. It was the principal church of London, a symbol of the city itself. It had stood for centuries. It had survived earlier fires. Its destruction seemed unthinkable, yet it burned. Elsewhere in the city, attempts to stop the fire continued. Gunpowder was brought in. Buildings were deliberately blown up to create fire breaks. This was dangerous work. Explosions had to be carefully controlled. Too much powder could spread the fire. Too little would not bring the building down. Teams of men worked to place charges, to clear people from the area, to detonate the powder. Some of these efforts succeeded. Some did not. The fire was now burning across a vast area, from the Tower of London in the east to the Fleet River in the west. It had consumed most of the city within the walls. Monday night was perhaps the worst night of the fire. The flames were visible for miles. The sky glowed orange. Smoke obscured the stars. The heat was so intense that people could feel it from streets away. The sound was constant. The roar of flames, the crash of collapsing buildings, the shouts of people trying to save what they could. King Charles II became directly involved in fighting the fire. He and his brother, James, Duke of York, visited the fire zones in person. This was unusual. Kings did not typically involve themselves in such crises. But Charles recognized the severity. He took action. He ordered the demolition of buildings on a much larger scale. Entire rows of houses were to be pulled down. Legal niceties were set aside. The priority was stopping the fire. Charles also ordered troops to assist. Soldiers from the garrison at the Tower of London were deployed. They helped with demolition. They worked the fire engines. They maintained order. The presence of the king and his brother had an effect. It coordinated efforts. It gave authority to the firefighters. James, Duke of York, worked alongside the men. He helped operate fire engines. He organised teams to fight the flames in different areas. This direct involvement was noted by witnesses. It was remembered later. The king also took steps to prevent unrest. He knew that displaced people needed food and shelter, that fear and anger could lead to violence. He issued proclamations. Markets in surrounding towns were to supply London. Prices were to be regulated. He assured Londoners that the government would help with rebuilding. These measures helped maintain order, though the situation remained tense. By Monday night, The wind showed some signs of lessening. This was the first change in conditions since the fire began. If the wind dropped, fire breaks might become effective. The fire might be contained. Tuesday, September 4th, brought a change. The wind decreased, not dramatically, but noticeably. This altered the situation. Fire breaks that had been created overnight began to hold. The fire reached them and stopped. The flames no longer leaped across gaps. They burned what was immediately available, then died down. In the western part of the city, the temple area was threatened. This was where lawyers had their offices and chambers. Demolition teams created a wide firebreak. The temple was saved. To the north, Cripplegate and areas near the city wall were also protected by demolition. The fire was being contained, slowly, but it was being contained. Fighting continued through Tuesday, but the sense of crisis began to ease. The fire was no longer advancing on all fronts. It was being pushed back. By Tuesday evening, most of the active burning was concentrated in a smaller area. The worst was over, though no one could be certain yet. Small fires still burned, buildings still collapsed, but the great advance had stopped. By Wednesday, September 5th, the fire was largely under control. There were still flames in places, still smoke, still heat, but the spread had stopped. Teams continued to work. They put out remaining fires. They watched for rekindling. Some buildings smouldered for days. Embers could reignite if not carefully extinguished. But the crisis was over. The fire had burned for nearly 4 days, from Sunday night through Wednesday. Its extent was vast. Looking at the city from outside the walls, the damage was clear. Much of the area within the walls was destroyed. Entire neighborhoods were gone. Only the eastern and northern fringes had survived largely intact. The financial district, the commercial heart, the old medieval streets, all burned. The statistics of the Great Fire are difficult to verify, but contemporary accounts provide estimates. Approximately 13,000 houses were destroyed. This is the figure given in official reports. 87 parish churches were lost, out of about 100 within the walls. St. Paul's Cathedral was destroyed entirely. As mentioned earlier, the Guildhall was severely damaged. The Royal Exchange was lost. Custom House was burned. Dozens of company halls belonging to the city guilds. These buildings represented centuries of construction, of investment, of civic identity. An estimated 70,000 people were left homeless. In a city of 400,000, this meant nearly 1 in 6 Londoners had lost their homes. The financial cost was enormous. Estimates varied widely. Some put it at millions of pounds, others at 10 million or more. These figures are difficult to compare to modern values, but they represented a catastrophic loss. One striking aspect of the fire is the low number of recorded deaths. Official records list very few fatalities, perhaps 6 or 7 confirmed deaths. This seems impossibly low given the scale of the disaster. Modern historians have several explanations. First, many deaths may have gone unrecorded. The poor and homeless left no records. Bodies consumed completely by fire left no trace. Second, most people had time to escape. The fire advanced slowly enough that people could flee. It was not like a sudden earthquake or explosion. Third, the fire burned mostly buildings, not people. Most casualties were likely from smoke, falling debris, or exhaustion, not from direct burning. Still, the official number is almost certainly too low. The true toll will never be known. The area destroyed covered approximately 430 acres within the city walls. This was roughly 80% of the old city. Only the periphery survived. the Tower area in the east, some northern parishes, a few western sections. Everything else was ash and rubble. In the days following the fire, the city faced immediate challenges. Tens of thousands of people were without shelter. Temporary camps formed in the fields outside the city. More fields filled with tents and makeshift shelters. People slept in the open, under whatever covering they could find. Food was a concern. Markets had been destroyed. Shops were gone. Supply lines were disrupted. The government acted to prevent famine and unrest. King Charles issued orders for surrounding areas to send food to London. Bread, meat, other provisions. Prices were to be controlled. Profiteering was forbidden. These measures helped. Though distribution was chaotic, disease was another worry. Large groups of people in unsanitary conditions could lead to outbreaks. Fortunately, no major epidemic occurred. This was perhaps due to the approaching autumn weather, or perhaps to luck. An investigation into the cause of the fire began quickly. A committee was established. Witnesses were called. Testimony was taken. The formal conclusion blamed the bakery on Pudding Lane, specifically Thomas Farriner's negligence. Farriner denied this. He insisted the fire could not have started in his oven, but the evidence pointed to his bakery as the origin. This became the official finding. Public suspicion of deliberate arson persisted. Foreigners, particularly the Dutch and French, were suspected. Some were questioned. Some were arrested. One man, Robert Hubert, confessed to starting the fire. He was a Frenchman. He claimed he had thrown a firebomb into the bakery. His confession was accepted. He was tried and executed in October 1666. Later investigation showed that Hubert could not have been responsible. He had not arrived in London until 2 days after the fire started. His confession was false. Why he confessed remains unclear. He may have been mentally ill. He may have been tortured. He may have sought attention. His execution was a miscarriage of justice, but it reflected the fear and need for blame that gripped the city. Rebuilding began remarkably quickly. Within weeks of the fire, people were clearing sites, salvaging materials, planning new construction. The destruction offered an opportunity, a chance to redesign the city. Several architects and planners submitted proposals. Christopher Wren, a mathematician and architect, proposed a complete redesign: wide boulevards radiating from central squares, open spaces, regular blocks. John Evelyn, a diarist and scholar, proposed a similar plan: straight streets, classical proportions. Robert Hooke, a scientist, submitted another design. These plans were ambitious. They would have created a modern city, orderly, rational, beautiful, but they were impractical. The city could not wait years for a complete redesign. People needed to rebuild their homes, their businesses. Property rights were complex. Landowners held title to specific plots. Redrawing the street pattern would require compensating thousands of owners, negotiating thousands of agreements. The cost would be enormous, the legal challenges overwhelming. The city decided to rebuild largely along the old street patterns. Property boundaries were preserved. Streets followed their old routes. This disappointed the visionaries, but it allowed rebuilding to proceed. However, important reforms were implemented. New building regulations were established. These were enforced more strictly than before. Buildings had to be constructed of brick or stone. Timber facades were prohibited. Roofs had to be tile or slate. No more thatch. Buildings were classified by type. Requirements varied based on the class of street and building size. Street widths were increased in some areas, especially main thoroughfares. These regulations improved safety. They reduced fire risk. They created a more durable city. The regulations remain influential. They shaped London's character for centuries. Rebuilding took years. Some areas recovered quickly, others took a decade or more. St Paul's Cathedral was not begun until 1675. Construction continued until 1710. Christopher Wren was chosen to design the new cathedral. His plan created the building that stands today. Many of the parish churches were also rebuilt under Wren's direction. He designed dozens of churches. These buildings became landmarks. Their spires defined the skyline. Company halls and public buildings were reconstructed. The Royal Exchange, the Guildhall. By the end of the 17th century, London had recovered. The new city was different. Brick instead of timber, wider streets, stone churches. But it was still London, still on the same site, still the centre of English commerce and government. The Great Fire changed London permanently. The medieval city was gone. The narrow alleys, the overhanging houses, the wooden structures. What replaced it was more modern, more resistant to fire, more planned. Building standards improved. Fire safety became a serious concern. The fire also influenced urban planning beyond London. Other cities studied what happened. They adopted similar regulations, encouraged brick construction, widened streets. Insurance developed as a result of the fire. Fire insurance companies were established. They offered protection against loss. Some of these companies maintained their own fire brigades. These were early forms of professional firefighting. The fire became part of London's historical memory. It was commemorated, written about, remembered. The monument to the Great Fire was built in the 1672. It stands near Pudding Lane, where the fire began. A column 2 feet high. The fire was not unique in European history. Other cities experienced similar disasters. Hamburg burned in 1842. Chicago burned in 1871. San Francisco burned in 1906. What distinguishes London's fire is the scale and the documentation. Contemporary accounts are detailed. Diaries exist. Official records survived. Samuel Pepys, a naval administrator, kept a diary throughout the period. His entries describe the fire day by day. John Evelyn also recorded the events in his diary. These personal accounts, combined with official reports, provide a comprehensive picture. We know what happened, hour by hour in some cases. We know where the fire spread, how it was fought, how people responded. This level of detail is rare for 17th century events. It allows us to understand not just what happened, but how it happened and why. The Great Fire of London was not a single moment. It was a process. It unfolded over 4 days. It began with a spark in a bakery. It ended with most of the city in ruins. The fire was shaped by weather, by the east wind that blew for days. It was shaped by building practices, timber construction, narrow streets, flammable materials. It was shaped by human decisions, the delay in creating fire breaks, the hesitation of the Lord Mayor, but also by human courage, the people who fought the fire, the king who coordinated the response, the ordinary Londoners who helped their neighbours. The consequences were long-lasting. Tens of thousands lost their homes. Livelihoods were destroyed. Landmarks were erased. But the city recovered. It rebuilt. It adapted. New regulations made it safer. New buildings made it stronger. The medieval city was gone, but London itself survived. It continued as a centre of trade, of government, of culture. The fire did not destroy London. It transformed it. Out of the ashes came a different city, modern in some ways, still rooted in its past. The story of the Great Fire reminds us that cities are fragile. They can be damaged, even destroyed, but they can also recover. They can rebuild. They can endure. London burned in 1666, but London did not end. The fire passed, the ruins cooled, and the city rose again